Good afternoon and welcome to the Community Housing Cymru Welsh Government Draft Budget. I'm John Price and we're live on Facebook, LinkedIn and YouTube. Thank you for your patience and we will get through to the nitty-gritty of all your discussions. Please feel free to ask any questions. If you're watching live and you want to ask any questions, please do type on the comment boxes, whether you're on LinkedIn, Facebook or YouTube. If I can ask by reintroducing yourselves, Bryony and Paul, and we can then kick off the proceedings.
Yeah, sure. Hi everyone, I'm Bryony Haynes and I'm the Policy and External Affairs Officer at Community Housing Cymru, working across a variety of areas, but at the minute focusing on Renting Homes Act, the Housing Matters campaign and second homes.
And I'm Paul Thompson. I'm the newly joined Head of Policy and External Affairs, covering Ria while she's on maternity leave. And my main focus is on finance and decarbonisation, on rent and affordability, and on our wider public affairs work. So good to meet you all virtually.
Just set the scene for this draft budget, which was announced yesterday. There was a lot announced, big numbers and big commitments from a variety of areas, including health, the cost of living, support during the next phase of COVID, and of course housing. What's the significance about this particular draft budget for you?
Well, thanks, John. So I'll chip in first, Bryony. So I think with this budget, the first thing is to say that obviously it's the first budget of the new Senedd. So that kind of sets a tone, if you like, in terms of how the Welsh Government will deliver its priorities over the next few years. Also, it's obviously the first budget since the Labour-Plaid Cooperation Agreement, which is really important for our sector because that sets out a number of key priorities for Labour and Plaid in terms of relevance to our sector, everything from supply to decarbonisation, homelessness, affordable and fair rents, etc. So again, in terms of the kind of backdrop, if you like, it's really important for us, for our members and for our partners and stakeholders, and will help to give us an indication about, if you like, direction of travel now that we've got some figures and real money, if you like, behind that now and over the next few years. I guess, the wider backdrop, obviously, unfortunately, the pandemic is still continuing and the Welsh Government has made really clear that it wants to focus on how to mitigate the negative impacts of COVID and the impact that has had on Welsh communities in different ways. And also the climate emergency as well. That's a critical, if you like, priority and pillar for the Welsh Government. And this budget, which we'll go on to talk about in terms of the climate impact, is right up there front and centre in the draft budget. I think, what I would probably also, the last 2 points I'd make on the backdrop, I guess, the kind of importance of the budget is that in terms of the fiscal challenge, it's tougher, and I guess it will be tougher. In the draft budget, the Welsh Government point out that by 2024, 2025, the budget will be £30 billion smaller than if it had grown in line with the economy since 2010, 2011. So that presents a fiscal challenge. But it's one that obviously we are aware to and our members are aware to, and that will present challenges though for the kind of priorities that decision makers who we engage with will need to make. And I think finally, like a stick of rock, if you like, through the draft budget is this focus on a stronger, greener and fairer Wales. That's kind of if you like, a kind of real, that feels like and sounds like a kind of political philosophy for the next few years in terms of what the Welsh Government wants to deliver. And stronger, fairer, greener Wales essentially kind of, I think, means delivering great public services, supporting businesses for the future, stronger communities. Housing's got a key role to play in that, and our members are playing a key role in that, and will play an increasingly important role in that. And then I think finally, it's also obviously around decarbonising the economy and society. So big challenges ahead for the Welsh Government. The budget tries to set out a path forward. And, that gives us as a sector and as an organisation a great opportunity to really help decision makers and to make sure our members' interests are up there front and centre as we move forward.
Yeah, I think with that fiscal challenge in mind, the general feeling of the budget was actually quite positive, considering that in terms of the housing sector anyway, and I'm sure we'll get onto the specific figures in a minute, but ambitious, and it does provide a certain amount of stability and certainty for our members as well. Let's talk about the figures a bit more, I suppose.
Well, absolutely. Let's talk about the figures. There was a lot of big numbers out there yesterday. So, say, for example, the £1 billion investment that we're going to see in social housing. What is the what figures strike out for you most, Bryony? Which ones do you think that will really, really help our members?
Yeah, so the biggie would be the social housing grant. So we've seen record-breaking investment yesterday, so an overall investment of £310 million for the next financial year, and this is going to be part of a multi-year settlement. So then it's going to be 330 for 23-24, 325 for 24-25. So really positive. We aimed high. We asked for 300 million. So this is really positive news for our members, in terms of Welsh Government recognising that financial support is required to reach theirs and Housing Association shared goal of those 20,000 homes, over the next Senedd term. So really good news in that aspect. However, with that investment there, which is positive, we still need to be mindful of the extraordinary pressures that are currently affecting housing associations in seeking to build those new homes. So planning, availability of land, staffing and skills shortage. And then that's where this journey continues, with us continuing to work with Welsh Government and the Welsh Local Government Association as well to deliver those commitments, particularly in line with our Shared Housing Supply Pact as well. It's also important to say as well that the SHG was also part of our Housing Matters campaign as well, which then links in with the prevention of homelessness with that affordable housing supply.
Absolutely. What numbers strike out for you, Paul?
Yeah, so I think actually I'd agree with everything that Bryony just said, and I think also the commitments to building safety are really important. That's a key priority that was set out in the draft budget in terms of ensuring that people are living in safe homes. So key figures on that in terms of funding, extra £375 million in terms of kind of capital expenditure. So that's great. And I think also probably to point out the £166 million that went towards a housing support grant as well, to kind of help tackle issues around homelessness and other issues. So those are two kind of key figures. I think the other thing I'd kind of throw in, which we'll come on to in more detail, I guess, is just around the fact that there was a kind of I think it was a 1.8 £8 billion commitment in terms of a new infrastructure finance plan, and part of that part of that 8 billion, 1.8 billion of that 8 billion will go towards climate change and decarbonisation issues which affect our sector, which I'm sure we'll come on to. So those would be my kind of key figures from the budget.
I just want to go back to what you were saying, Paul, as well about the housing support grant. So again, the Housing Matters campaign with Cymru, that was one of our key asks in terms of maintaining that baseline funding of £166 million to help fund those prevention services for homelessness. So it was really reassuring to see that stability over the next 3 years for our members. We did ask for this to increase with inflation, which it doesn't do, but that's something to work on and make more of a case for in the future. But it's great that we've got that stability and consistency of the 166 million.
Absolutely. So we've got the building commitments. We need to build 20,000 social homes over this Senedd period. With the investments, with the draft budget yesterday, do you think that the figures match with the ambitions?
Do you want to take this, Paul?
Yeah. Well, I think there's thanks. So I guess, from our perspective, it's definitely a step, in the right direction. Obviously, we welcome that the funding that is in the draft budget, and again, I guess realise and recognise that there are some quite serious fiscal challenges ahead. But there's more to do, and there's more that we are going to be focused on in terms of engaging with decision makers. Because if, for example, maybe we kind of might cover this in decarbonisation, as one big issue, that there's the challenges are huge, the challenges are immense, and definitely in terms of kind of further funding and more certainty, that's something which we still need in several areas. I don't know, Bryony, would you agree with that?
Yes, I do agree with that, and just taking us back, quite a bit actually to the Senedd election period and our home manifesto and all the sort of asks and commitments that we want from Welsh Government. With this budget, we've seen a little bit more detail in line with our home manifesto and those key commitments, particularly around what we need for that 20,000 homes target. But there are some wider financial asks in there that are only partially covered at the minute. So yes, there's been announcements on decarb, but there is that longer term ask of the 10-year £4 billion stimulus package to retrofit all those social homes. So yeah, they're recognising those challenges ahead still.
Absolutely. Yeah. And do you see what do you think are the biggest challenges in order to reach that 20,000 target with the investment at hand? Do you see, do you think it's the aspect of the decarbonisation element of it, or do you think it's more of the fact of maybe geography? Maybe you're just trying to find the places to fit the 20,000 homes. Where do you think the challenges lie?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, really, to be honest. It's being able to deliver at the scale and pace that is required. Obviously, the start of COVID halted targets and deliverability of house building in the social sector. But, housing associations are very eager, very keen, and very committed to delivering that. It's also things like making sure that surplus public land is available, working with the Welsh Government to identify those pockets and those areas. But also recognising that, there are issues with things like the Welsh language, employability. There's a whole holistic approach in terms of community as well that needs to be in the mind of going forward.
Well, you mentioned quite a lot about decarbonisation, and I think it's probably the best way for us to discuss the next topic is decarbonisation, because these 20,000 homes need to be low carbon. They need to meet a certain net zero target. Decarbonisation has been almost the buzzword of the year, particularly with COP26 being just a few short weeks ago. What do you make of the decarbonisation announcements, and how do you think that will fit with the housing sector in Wales?
Yeah, you're definitely right, John, to say that decarbonisation, if you like, has been the buzzword of the year, and certainly, I guess it will be the buzzword for the next few years. The challenges are huge in terms of decarbonisation, not just within the social housing sector, but across the economy and society. But the role of our sector in terms of the importance that our sector has within communities, and especially the kind of close engagement that we have with tenants and our members have with tenants, the critical role that our members are playing, means that actually we're at the forefront and will be in terms of trying to help Welsh Government and others and communities to, I guess, unlock the benefits of decarbonisation plus the challenges, because there are obviously kind of big challenges there. So the funding that was announced in the draft budget, as I mentioned earlier, there's a kind of as part of a kind of infrastructure finance plan, there's £8 billion committed there, but then there's 1.8, I think, of that 8 billion committed towards, 580 million even committed towards decarbonisation existing stock, social housing stock, and that's a welcome commitment. Again, definitely we welcome that funding. I guess that we would also, and will continue to argue, that we need something which is longer term, kind of much more certain over a kind of 10-year period. We're looking at costs of between £4 to £5 billion to decarbonise, our sector, and we need certainty in terms of, if you like, particularly the kind of public element of that funding. So perhaps over 10 years, as well as making sure that the housing sector, social housing sector, is well placed to access the right kinds of models of private finance, particularly from investors, who have the right kind of, I guess, social and environmental goals. So, it's a big challenge for our sector, but it's not just about, I guess, kind of asking, decision makers for money. Because the scale of the challenge in terms of funding is huge. It's also about learning, best practice, ideas, what we as a sector we're doing already and what we can offer further. So, for example, the funding that went towards the optimised retrofit programme that was announced yesterday, there was extra funding towards that. That's I try and remember the figures off the top of my head, but essentially I think it jumps to 62 million this year and then to 92 million in 2024, 2025. So that's welcome again. That will provide opportunities for housing associations that are already involved in that programme to learn more, to offer more in terms of insights learning. So there's a lot still to do, step in the right direction, but a bigger job, I think, to still get the certainty over funding and a plan that really is kind of quite pragmatic for our members. And I think, Bryony might also have some thoughts around the WHQS as well, because that's something else we have to kind of focus on as well. So I'll leave it there for the minute. And
well, it's interesting, Bryony. So do you feel as if the funding announcements announced a drafted budget yesterday, do you feel as if that will help Wales on the path towards the net zero in reaching our targets?
Yes, definitely. I think the first thing to state is that decarbonisation challenge in the housing sector in Wales is huge, particularly compared to the rest of Europe. We have some of the oldest, most least efficient housing going. And I think it's about £18,000 per house to decarbonise it from previous research we've had commissioned. And so it is huge, and that funding does need to be there, and it's very welcome and it's very recognised. I think with the decarbonisation challenge as well, which is not ever really reflected so much in the funding, is how to bring in that tenant engagement side as well, because it's not just about, okay, we're going to decarbonise these houses. There needs to be some sort of resource there, and yes, that might be financial as well, but there needs to be something there to involve tenants and bring them on board as well. And there has been a lot of comms activity going on, but as part of a tenant engagement community of practice that I run with Cyngor Cymru, it's quite often reiterated that this needs to be part of the Welsh Government's plans as well. So it would be nice to see sort of more plans like that in the future.
Absolutely. And one of the things you mentioned, Paul, in your answer just now was about, needing that long-term funding. There are quite a lot of long-term funding announcements, not just for the next year, but for the forthcoming couple of, 2 or 3 years time, kind of, a benchmark of what we're to expect over this Senedd term. How important is long-term funding when it comes to not just any budget, but just for the housing sector in general?
Yeah, that's a good point, John. I mean, long-term funding, is critical because, in the social housing sector and in other sectors, it just gives an element of certainty. And when you have certainty, you can begin to plan. And, I think from a public affairs and political perspective as well, it also is an important signal to our sector, to industry, to business, to our partners from government that actually, they are committed, and that, that signal can be underestimated, but it's really important. It's a really important signal. And I think the fact that this year we have a multi-year settlement in terms of a draft budget is a really good thing. Partly that's happened because the UK Comprehensive Spending Review is a 3-year settlement, so that's also helped the Welsh Government to put in place that multi-year settlement, which provides some certainty, but there are lots of challenges ahead still. So certainty, definitely important, but long-term planning. I think the final thing I would just kind of say, actually, in reply to your answer, John, is that long-term planning, some of the big challenges that our sector has require longer term planning beyond 3 years, beyond 4 years. We talked about decarbonisation and our call for a 10-year strategy on it, because that's the scale of the challenge requires the scale of that commitment, and sometimes that can be hard for, I guess, political decision makers to commit to, because election cycles are shorter and there's a whole host of other reasons. But it's something that we're going to continue to call for, and it's super, super important.
Absolutely. And one of the areas where the funding investment is going towards is towards building safety. Bryony, how poignant, particularly what we've seen over the last few years, has been such a topical discussion about how safe our buildings are, particularly when it comes to cladding. How important is it to have that mention in a draft budget like this?
Yeah, so obviously the legacy of Grenfell still continues and is very much in the forefront of housing associations' minds as well. This budget reinforces that building safety is still a key priority for the Welsh Government and reaffirms their commitment to ensuring that all homes are safe places to live. So, it specifically references the budget now, the systemic building safety weaknesses of high-rise residential buildings, and it details the government's commitment to ensuring the safety of residents within these buildings. So it's really welcome in terms of the figures, again, increasing over the next 3 years, and that will enable long-term investment in the remediation of blocks of flats through the second phase of the Welsh Building Safety Fund. Alongside that, supporting the delivery of the Building Safety Passport scheme. There's a number of measures, particularly in light of the Building Safety White Paper as well, that the government has put forward. So it's good to see that there's a concrete plan in place and that the funding is now there to enable that to be delivered.
Absolutely. Going somewhere completely different, because one of the reasons why I'm mentioning this is because we have the Labour and Plaid Cymru cooperation agreement from a few weeks ago, and one of the things that struck a lot of us in the sector is around the talk around the Welshwide construction company, and there is some support to go into that. So it's just good to have an insight from both of you to our audience here about what it is, what's your understanding of it, and how that can impact our members today.
Sure. So, in the draft budget, there was £1 million committed funding to developing the construction companies developing in us. Hope I pronounced that correctly. And I think it's still not quite clear exactly how that will develop, but there are a number of key, I guess, priorities that certainly Plaid would like the construction company, national construction company, to focus on. So, in its essence, it's will be a not-for-profit body accountable to the Welsh Government and the Senedd. So, but also focused very much on, I think, key areas such as supporting local authorities and social housing associations in terms of developing their pipeline of future development, supporting best practice as well, within housing sector, and also kind of looking at new models of construction, so more modern methods of construction. And I think the final thing I would kind of throw out there is that I think there's an ambition that this organisation in the future helps support the local Welsh economy as well through procurement, through the supply chain, etc. So yeah, that's we're still I think trying to understand the potential of the organisation, and that's something which we'll all be kind of engaging on. But that's what I understand in terms of kind of what the focus may be moving forward.
Yeah, I think you're right, Paul. There's not too much detail on it yet, but it's great to see again the reinforced commitment and support for councils and social landlords to improve that supply of social and affordable housing. I think there's also a pledge to publish a white paper to include proposals for the right to adequate housing, and I know there are some things that are going to be addressed, not related to the social sector but the private sector as well, with the idea of rent controls and what parts that can play as well. But looking forward to seeing how that's going to look in the future.
And what's your message to the members then, if they're trying to think about a Welsh construction company? What's your message to them at this exact moment? Is it just to kind of wait and is it a matter of just waiting and seeing what's announced in the future?
Yeah, I think we need more detail, and also that engagement first and foremost with Welsh Government of what this is going to look like. What part can we play? What part can our members play? It's all about that engagement and shaping the plans for it where we can. So it seems very much in the early stages, and just we will obviously endeavour to keep members as involved as we can.
Absolutely. Bryony, you mentioned earlier about the Home Manifesto, which has been, massively important for us in terms of how we feel that the housing sector could look in terms of helping our members and also their residents and tenants. We've seen quite a lot of tick boxing, so we can see some of the announcements and say, yes, that's something that we've called for, there's something that we've called for, which is absolutely great to see. Is there anything in the Home Manifesto that you think isn't in the draft budget, which you think probably should be in the final budget as we see it in the months to come?
I think this kind of goes back to what I said at the beginning. There are some things in the Home Manifesto where it was sort of more long-term funding asks, and whereas the budget provides snippets, it's over a 3-year period as opposed to a 10-year period for decarb, or the 5-year period for social housing grant. But generally speaking, there's starting to be that nice reflection of what we asked for in the Home Manifesto versus what's being delivered in the programme for government and now the budget. Programme for Government also made a commitment to paying social care workers that real living wage. It didn't provide much detail, but this budget now gives a little bit more of a time frame. So we're expecting this to be allocated through local government settlement to enable authorities to meet that requirement by April 2022. So it's a welcome step forward that, this is ensured. I know there was a bit of backlash when this was first announced, as there was no specific time frame. So it's nice that the social care sector has that sort of reassurance now that is going to be delivered through that settlement.
Absolutely. So as we've been mentioning, this is a draft budget. We're waiting until, obviously, how do you feel that this will pan out now? So the final budget will be in March time, we believe. This is how previous years have, sought for us. So what do you expect now between now and when the final budget is released?
Yes, I guess, there'll be, even though we're heading up to kind of the Christmas period, I guess there'll be further analysis, both, obviously from our sector, but also from Welsh industry, Welsh business and our partners. But I think actually then there'll be a debate in February in the Senate. So there may be, who knows, there may be kind of, further changes to the budget. potentially, I guess, on the back of political scrutiny as well. But I mean, I think, and it's probably not wise to make predictions as of political things these days. But I as far as I understand, I think ideally what's been proposed, hopefully, and should pretty much be what is agreed in terms of the final budget. And I would hope, particularly for our sector, there won't be any changes. We will continue to kind of keep our foot on the gas or the pedal, whatever the appropriate metaphor or cliche is, and to kind of make sure that those commitments are implemented, and then our other commitments, obviously, that we're all continuing to campaign on. And I think also to say that actually just because the budget sets out certain funding over a 3-year period, it doesn't mean that kind of closes the opportunity, obviously, for the government to agree to future pledges and future funding. So whilst this budget is great, there's still plenty of opportunity for us, which we're going to take in terms of trying to make sure that our members' interests are represented and implemented.
Yeah, I echo everything that Paul's saying. It's a time for just analysing things in a bit more detail and pinpointing where maybe some discussions may need to be had, where there's gaps in knowledge. I know there's a little bit of gap in knowledge in emergency accommodation and how that looks for local authorities. So we'll continue to work with Cymru on that. Also, just to mention that there is some things that were a part of the cooperation agreement that haven't featured in the budget. So second homes, for example, this draft budget doesn't include any proposed changes to land transaction tax rates. Instead, Welsh Government are very much keeping this part of separate consultation activity. I don't expect that to change as part of the final budget, but it's just important to note that not everything in the cooperation agreement features in this budget either.
Yeah.
So we're coming up to the end of this discussion. I just wanted to get your kind of final thoughts, really, just your kind of, your final collections, really. Do you see much more room for optimism for the future in terms of the housing sector and for our members, and also when it comes to the standard of living for their tenants and residents?
Yeah, so from my perspective, definitely optimistic. I think that if you look at the draft budget and if you look at the cooperation agreement, there's a real desire for communities and to be better places for the people who live in them. And the agendas and the issues that our sector are linked to and our members are linked to, around communities, around health inequalities, around the supply of housing, decarbonisation. We touch on all of the big issues, that both Welsh Government and others need to focus on. So I think, there's a real kind of, there's real reason to be optimistic that we have and will play a bigger part. And hopefully we can secure the kind of fiscal support to do that as well.
Yeah, final thoughts from me. Generally, optimistic feeling, particularly with the social housing grant. That was very much welcomed. It's always slightly annoying that the budget is, in this Christmas period now, because this is a time where perhaps you would want more engagement with housing associations or to have those initial conversations. But, it gives people time to reflect, and we can come back in January and see what our members think in that aspect. But generally positive, and it's just working out now how we can support members going forward with that.
Yeah, I would just, sorry, John, just to jump in, I'll just kind of reiterate what Bryony said actually about the social housing grant, in terms of the investment that the government have committed to, through that vehicle, and that's a kind of real vote of confidence in our sector. To be able to kind of commit those record-breaking sums is a real kind of vote of confidence, and that's down to the hard work of our members. So I think, optimism and confidence in the future, and we can kind of build on what the draft budget sets out for the future.
Absolutely. Well, 2022 is certainly going to be a very interesting year on how everything will be navigating for us. There's a lot of discussions to be had, of course, after Christmas and New Year, because suddenly we've got Christmas coming up this weekend. And yes, no doubt we've got lots of exciting discussions coming up. So we've reached the end of our live stream. So thank you so much. And thank you so much for your patience during the beginning when we had some technical issues. I'd like to thank Bryony and Paul to joining this live stream. We were also meant to have Bethan Proctor to be part of this discussion, but she was unfortunately unwell and unable to take part today, so we wish her a very speedy recovery. I'd like to thank you all for listening. Feel free to follow us on our social media platforms across, we're on Facebook, Twitter and LinkedIn. You can see the, the details right at the bottom of your screen here. That's all it leaves for me to say is, Nadolig Llawyn, blwyddyn newydd dda, so happy Christmas and a happy New Year, and everybody stay safe.
Thanks.
Thanks all. Thanks, John. Thanks, Wayne.